Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're in YouTube, you might see a little link down there. You can actually join us in Zoom if you'd like. In Zoom, you may be an attendee looking at all these panelists thinking that you know better, and you might. And we'd love to have you come in. We open at 6 o'clock. You don't have to be here at 6, but we start talking at 6. And it's usually a pretty fun conversation. So you're more than welcome to come early. Between 6:30 and 6:40, we release the Discord link. That's where almost 800 of us keep talking about this stuff between all these sessions. And then between 6:40 and 6:45, we start the mic check. So if you want to be in the panel, and we'd love to have you join the panel. If you're here and you think you have something to contribute, definitely we'd love to have you here and being part of the conversation. Just be here by 6:40 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. Then at 7 o'clock, and between 6:40 and 7, we do these mic checks and we all kind of chit chat. This is a perfect time for you to ask questions. So you can jump in there, you can ask questions, you can vote on questions. This is an unusual show, probably one of the more unique shows where the show is all of us. So as an attendee, you voting and asking questions is a key part of the programming. So it's really important that you ask questions, and it's really important that you vote on those questions so we know which ones we should talk about first. We'll do that general discussion between 7 and 8. 8 to 9, we have kind of specialty verticals. So in those cases, it's usually something. Today we're going to talk about education. Mondays are kind of a wild card. This Monday we're going to take just a short day because it's Labor Day here in the United States, but we'll still have general questions. Tuesdays are audio. Wednesdays are video and cameras. Thursdays are a special guest, and Fridays are education. One thing to note is that we will be tomorrow. We'll have education for an hour. We're going to do kind of introductions, have educators talk about what they do and where they've come from, and as well as look at we're going to have the coffee film festival. So that'll be tomorrow morning. Also, Final Cut and Motion were released about 10 days ago. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring some experts in along with our experts. So our experts and other experts will come in, and so we'll have our own Bill Davis and Chris Fenwick, as well as Steve Martin, Steve Bays, Mark Spencer, maybe a couple more joining the panel. So we're not going to do demos. So we talked about it. They'll jump into things to describe things. But what we're going to do is I'm going to send out an email today that sends you to the videos of the overviews from Steve and Mark. So you just watch those ahead of time. It's kind of I think that's the model that we're flipping the classroom here. So you can get to watch the videos that are overviews, and then we'll discuss it tomorrow for a couple hours. So anyway, so that's what we have planned. If you want to share this, the bigger this gets, the more interesting things we can do. But don't share your own link. Share the link that I'm posting here. That's the one you want to share around to add more people to our merry group. So, Phil, what's the first question?
Good morning. Good Friday morning. And first question from Rick Combs. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. You all keep talking about ISO. What does ISO mean?
It is isolated, is what we're referring to. It's an isolated track, and generally, what that means is that we're recording an individual track or an individual video for that. Go ahead, Jason, and then Bill.
Yeah, but there's a common misconception about this. My guess is he's a photographer and he's thinking, oh, this is a trick question. I know ISO doesn't mean anything because, it's film grain and sensitivity to light. Yes, we know, but that's not this ISO.
And Nikki, I'm not seeing the meters. I'm just seeing a thing. It looks like it's muted. And Jason, you sound a little low, but maybe that's me. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the most commonly now you hear it in multicam shoots where somebody says, hey, can you also record ISOs? And what that means is, as well as the switch, can you record an individual camera feed so that you can go back and post and remix the show if you want to?
And most of the time, what we are doing when we record most of our shows, we record a program or what we call a dirty feed, which is everything with all the graphics and sweepers and lower thirds. Then we record a clean, which is the program without all the graphics on top of it. So without the lower thirds and other things like that. So we have a program and a clean. If it's a really big event, we have 2 programs and 2 cleans, primary and backup. Then we record ISOs, which are every camera or a select set of ISOs. If we don't need all the cameras, we have the wide shot that we can always go to, and then a couple close-ups. And so a lot of times a simple program can be 8 or 10 hyperdecks all running at the same time. Go ahead, Colin, and then Victor, and then Sky.
I was just going to take a guess that Rick might be from the enterprise contracting world, where ISO would be International Standards Organization, typically
Right.
relating to ISO 9000.
Yeah. But when we talk about it in video, we're talking about it as individual camera feeds. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Victor.
that was the one that caught me. I
Yep.
was thinking it was International Standards Organization. Like, what standard are we talking about?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Anyway.
to add even more confusion in audio, we can have ISOs that are recorded in the field as isolated tracks, but we can also have stems that are used oftentimes to export individual tracks in a multi-track project.
And stems are not always individual tracks. Stems
That's
are
correct.
they can be grouped. So when you ask for stems, you have to be careful, because that doesn't mean that you're getting all the individual tracks. All the mics might be a stem that is summed up for you, for better or for worse. And a lot of times you may not have the ability to record them all, so you're asking for things to be grouped in the way that they make most sense. Go ahead, Sky.
The reason you would do an isolated is so that you can either re-edit in post, or that you can specifically in the text, it's for international, so that somebody can put in other languages on top, and you don't want to put a layer on top of a baked in video layer.
Well, and one of the things that we use those ISOs for too, also, even if we're not going to re-edit with those ISOs, if we need to do a fix, something went wrong with a certain angle, we can grab that angle and just take a couple seconds and put it over top of that, of a different angle to cut around it. So we can, fix things with the ISOs. That's one of the reasons you want to kind of keep them, Jason.
That's why you also send out separate audio tracks too, so you can your
exactly.
Your music.
Also, if you want to do an ex post facto release of the same edit, my level looks better to me now.
Yep.
But if you want to do like a 4K release after your live stream, that's a great reason for ISO.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Yeah, Jeffrey Rees. Alex, can you elaborate on why you like real names as opposed to anonymous in our Discord? A friend of mine is opening up a Slack for a group of professionals and stated they prefer anonymous to allow freedom from any employer repercussions. It sounds valid, but I'm not sure if it is the right move.
So I don't, my opinion isn't based on that. I think that everyone should always use their real names. I think that I've actually built systems that allow people not only to not use their real names, but pretty carefully hide their location somewhere in the world, where it would be very hard to track them down going back out to analog and then back into IP and going cross, like it would make it almost impossible to find them, because they are political dissidents and they need to obscure their location. So I'm not saying that everyone should always use their real names. But what I will say is that using real names, I found over the last 20 years, has a distinct calming effect on the conversation, because people are personally accountable for what they say. I know I've told this story before, but I'll keep it short. I was in Zimbabwe talking to a gardener and a security guard about why they don't rise up against Robert Mugabe. And they said, we're Shona. We've been farmers for 1,000 years. And when you're a farmer, you know that if you get into a fight with your neighbor, they're still your neighbor tomorrow. And names are like that, is that, you can say a lot of things anonymously that you can't say if it's connected back to you. And so I think that it's important for us to, and it's just really hard to then re-add it if you allow it to be that way. And again, people can join the Discord without it. They just can't do very much. And I find that you end up with a better conversation and a tighter community when people use real names. And so I think that, like, fundamentally, like, for instance, the reason that Twitch and YouTube won't, when the next version comes out that's past them, it'll be because they didn't use real names. And they're not, it limits what they can do as far as interactivity, because it's just vile, what comes out of the depths of the internet when everybody's anonymous. So again, I think there's reasons to be anonymous. And I think that there's important reasons. I also personally don't post things online that I'm not willing to defend, ever. Like, if I'm going to have that conversation, I'm going to have it in person, without any electronics. Like, I work in places where you take all the electronics off, put them in a little thing, and you put them in a little locker. And so, so if you really want something to be careful, otherwise it's a false, it's dangerous to get loose with talking online and not think that people can figure out who you are. Like, it's a very dangerous thing to do. And people get into this, and, then it gets unwrapped. So I personally, that's why I sign up as my name for everything, is so that I personally stay in my head that I'm just going to say those things online, and I post everything publicly. I don't do a bunch of private stuff. I don't, because I'm just very careful about the security level of that. And it's just not appropriate to get into a mindset that, oh, I can say whatever I want now because this is private. You shouldn't assume that anything's private. Bill, and then Colin, then Phil.
Everything Alex said and more. I remember my first public online chat thing happened in an old thing called CB Simulator, and everybody was handles there because that's how CB people talked on the trucker thing, and they were trying to virtualize that. And the Discord the chat would get way out of hand. People would be calling people names, and they'd just be tearing each other to pieces. And so I remember thinking to myself, I'm only going to do things under my name. I'm going to take responsibility for what I say, good or bad. Then later, I ran across the Wayback Machine, which had been archiving the internet for many years by the time I found it. And I found some of those old chats that were permanent record from way back when. So it became even more important for me to do things on the internet that's take responsibility for what you say.
And just remember, when you think that your conversation is confidential, just remember that the NSA, the organization that is designed to keep all of this stuff secret and to be the most secretive, can't keep their own secrets. So just be clear, like and you're just a person doing this at home. So just keep that in mind, Colin, and then Phil.
Just that it is definitely use case specific. It sounds like Jeffrey's friend has a use case where anonymity is the target. So do it. There's nothing that says you can't. And just keep in mind that the anonymity that you're going to get from screen names on Slack is not as great as the anonymity you're going to get if you build something intentionally to be anonymous.
Right. And just know that if a large company decided they wanted to figure out who was saying that stuff about them, you have to be really good at what you do to keep them from figuring it out.
And you're not going to get that with Slack, no matter how good you are, just because the way Slack is constructed.
Most platforms, if they hire the right people, most platforms can't withstand someone figuring it out. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, if it's light conversation, just as a compromise, you could have a Slack channel where it is there. They have anonymous bots where you could allow sort of a light level of, people would want to be careful, of course, because of the reasons Alex said, but you could have a Slack channel where it's just anonymous conversation, but then keep everybody registered in real names. So that's a possibility if you wanted to consider.
It is what I would call fissionable material to talk about your employers or talk about other things like that and think that you're anonymous. Like literally just a little bit of focus with the right team and they'll figure out exactly who you are. And they may never tell you. You just may not get that next raise or the next thing or whatever. And just putting stuff online is really dangerous. You just remember that. Go ahead, Sky.
Bill, I'm just curious if the Wayback Machine, is that an ARPA or a DARPA instance?
The Wayback Machine is the Internet Archive Foundation, I think, runs that.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit. It's non-governmental.
Yeah. Well,
and it has the nicest building. They took over a temple, a Christian Science temple. I had lunch there a couple months ago, and it is the coolest building. Like it's just like, and they've got the servers that run it are in this big theater that they have there, and they're all working away in the basement. It's a really cool, like it feels like an archive. Like now that so it's
at some point ARPA and DARPA should be discussed because it's our origin. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, you're gonna say something. That's it.
I just wanted to reiterate, don't ever put anything on the internet that you aren't willing to say publicly. Real names are very simple. They enforce automatically, they create a level of civility that that like it just makes it easier.
So I'm definitely not telling people that they should do it for everything. I'm just saying that I just found with the community that I wanted to generate and the kind of discourse that I wanted, that they would be the most effective. And it also a lot of the rules that we have here basically self-sort. The way people enter, the way people how they get into Discord, how they interact in Discord, how they interact with everything, sorts people in and out. And I feel like it creates a useful community. Anyway, next question.
Doug Maltby from Minneapolis. Bandwidth caps are back in place. Is it possible to downgrade video in Zoom free on the client side, like on YouTube, to conserve bandwidth? I haven't found a way in settings. What is the secret?
Go ahead, Jason.
Just turn down your resolution.
Well, you can you can turn off enable HD in your inside of your videos. So that will, I think, limit you to 640 by 360. And I think it will do it both directions. I'm not certain. But also as an administrator, if you're trying to do it across the board, you can do it in the settings as well. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the free version of Zoom won't give you 720p anyway. So yeah, Zoom will automatically adjust to whatever bandwidth it can take up. So by default on a free account on Zoom it's 640. But if you're on a slower connection, then it'll adjust to it both
I'm kind of interested in
inbound and
what
outbound.
I have to admit that I am fascinated by what service you're that Doug that you're using that would have the limit be so low that even running Zoom all day would get you close to that
I'd say
limit.
Netflix would be more detrimental. Even an hour of Netflix would be way more detrimental.
I think a couple hours of Netflix will be more than a day of Zoom. So like a whole day. So I think that I'm curious as to, I mean, in other countries, I get that. In the US, I would strongly consider, unless if you have a choice, is move providers, because that's crazy, or threaten to move providers. You'd be surprised at how flexible providers get when you call to cancel. Now, Beju.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that it might be more to do if people who are accessing over cellular, especially because a lot of people who don't have access to proper broadband might be using 3G or 4G, especially in a lot of more rural areas. So that could be the issue for them.
Yeah, we don't have that much in the US because it's crazy, because it's so expensive. Like it's Mickey.
Yeah, Doug mentioned in the chat he's on Comcast, and with a 1.2 terabyte cap, with 3 heavy streamers working from home, they always hit the cap.
Wow,
So for
Comcast is one. I
Comcast,
didn't even know.
Get business internet. That
Yeah,
way you have a pairing agreement
expensive.
and no
Yeah,
bandwidth cap.
It's expensive, but yeah, I mean, I have business from Comcast, and then another one, but yeah, yeah.
Chris, you mean an SLA, right?
SLA, yeah, not a peering.
Not a pairing agreement.
Yep. Next
peering
question.
agreements agreement? Are between ISPs.
Yes.
So
People, I know, Colin, I misspoke.
Yep.
Yeah, well, just as a point of information, so peering agreements exist between ISPs, and they typically transfer or payments between ISPs, usually from the ISP with the smaller user base to the ISP with the larger user base, as a payment for access to their network.
Right.
And so
it's why you couldn't, like, I was in some conversation with somebody else and they were talking about how the little guy no longer could start a streaming thing because of Apple or something. I was like, yeah, without the peering agreements, you can't do streaming. Like you can't, like, it's not like at this point, if you're not working with someone with a peering agreement, it's not going to work. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
Yes, Attila Axe from Ocean Shores, Australia. Recommendations for a solid iPad Pro 12.9-inch mount that attaches to either a quarter 20 thread or a 3/8 thread from a mic stand. A clamp on the end would be fine as well. This is a Joby one.
The Joby one? Yeah, the Joby ones are good.
Yeah.
The ones we've used in schools, admittedly, I budget for them, but are the monitors in motion make locking ones that will lock, and they're like floating in space quality. So if you're looking for something that's kind of high end but you want to think about whether you need them to just move around or whether you need to lock it. So if you're doing it with schools, you sometimes want it to go over the corners and then have it lock in so that someone can't take it easily. And so we use those, but those are the only ones I have a lot of familiarity with. That and the Joby ones. The Joby ones are the only other ones I think I've used in the recent past. Greg and then Mickey. Greg.
Yeah. Well, when I bought mine, there was only one that would actually fit a 12.9, and that was the Caddy Buddies. But now there seem to be a whole bunch of them. Most
a lot of
the majors have gone to supporting 12.9.
Yep. Mickey?
Yeah, this is the same Joby one. I think that
and will that one, the one that you're holding up, will that extend to a 12? Will it get that big?
I'm
this
not
one will hold
sure,
the short side of 12. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Very good.
fully extended. But also look at on-stage stands. They make mic stands and a lot of accessories for them.
Yeah, on stage is really good. Go ahead, Paul.
This is the live stream, pretty cheap, and then it comes with a stand. You can put a bunch of cell phones on it too, so you just pop this onto there. You're laughing. Why are you laughing,
No,
Alex?
it's just because it's just
like that.
Yeah, the stuff you pull out is always like
Your
I was like,
5-point
I
T
think-
bar.
Are you
No,
making
it's-
fun of me again, Alex?
I'm
Are
not.
you
I
making
am
fun
not.
of me?
I am purely impressed. I'm impressed by the whole thing. I'm always impressed. Like I always like when you raise your hand when we're talking about these little knickknacks. I know that we're just going to see like something from the warehouse that is like exactly what we're talking about. That is, but like lots of them. I'm just always amazed. It's good.
We're
It's
in
great.
awe.
We're in awe. We're in awe. It's a mixture of being in awe and jealous. You know that you have all the toys all in one place in arm's reach, more than me.
Alex, I can't compare to you. That's
Yes,
totally
but
wrong.
Paul,
No
why
way.
why should you have one when 7 will do? You know?
That's great.
Paul's
That's
the
great.
Paul's the Fred Sanford of office hours.
Main
All
mic
right.
and 6
Jeffrey.
backups.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Okay, so this is the one that I use for my music. It is, they have the different brands. This one came from Hola. The one thing about this is it's not spring loaded and it doesn't push down onto your tablet. And then of course it goes corner to corner rather than top to bottom. That way you can go up to 15 inches. So many different tablets will work on that. And the best part, one thing I always recommend if you get that tablet stand is to slide the bottom part all the way to the end and tighten it, and then adjust from the top. That way it doesn't fall out. It will do a little bit of wiggle, but I'm using it on my drum set. It works perfect.
Great. Next question.
Caught me off guard. Sorry. Tony Mobley, what is the Zoom package you need for the Zoom rooms? Is it both meetings and webinar?
No, it's a whole different subscription. It's called Zoom Rooms, and it's I think $49 if you do it monthly, $41 if you do it by the year, and it's entirely different setup. So you don't have controls. You don't jump into it. It's a computer that says, "Okay, I'm going to do this thing," and then you have to have an external controller. We're using an iPad at the moment. I think we're going to buy because I'm buying so many of them. I'm going to get a bunch of little cheap Android that can link into it, and so. But you need a controller for each one. I mean, you could probably figure out a way to pair it, but that'd be a real pain. So you have a controller for each one of those, or one. And when people jump in, they'll just pop right in to do it. If you're not doing what I'm doing, or you don't actually have a room, I don't know if it's worth it. But if you are, what we're building is this kind of broadcast system that lets us bring lots of people in and go do point to point. Those go into the switcher. We have comms and audio and all kinds of stuff that we do on our end and then push it out to the world. And so we have very specific needs that require that and jobs that pay for it. But I think that it is a pretty useful thing, as Guy said. It took us a little while to get our head around it. It was like figuring out how to get it all set up and everything. And there's like a half an hour of like, what's going on here? And then it just worked. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, they're really cool in the business world. The first time that I saw one was at a friend's place in Redmond, and it had the little Polycom phone, which I wound up buying as well, which is speaker and microphone, and then you can get little satellite microphones too. But now that I'm using it at home and watching my teenager, do these Zooms for hours on end in front of a laptop, I'm like, we got to get one of these for the living room, because the new one, the $599 D10 27-inch, I think it's going to be something that takes off because you can whiteboard on it and other things, but when you see somebody calling you, that's kind of cool. And then you can just say, I want to go into this other room. So I can just dial into my office. So I just touch the screen behind me and say, jump into the conference room, and boom, I'm on. It just auto answers and I'm in the room. So if you have a bunch of edit suites and you just want to talk to somebody and their hands are on the keyboard, you can just pop in and start talking to them. That's kind of Bill Gates mode.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, because I do think that because we're kind of to take your point, that might be an interesting thing for us to do as well, because we've broken our production into pods. So everyone's separated. Everybody's got their own little room and that they've kind of built into. And so being able to jump around and talk to people we're not doing that right now. I mean, we set up calls to do that, but I can see how just being able to jump in would be useful. Yeah. Next question.
Yeah, Tony Tang has a softball question for us. If you were building a 15 by 15 conference room in an office to support high quality video conferencing and also local audio podcast recording, what ideas for AV equipment, acoustic treatment, teleprompter, and lighting would you consider? Need to make it look and sound great.
Well, that's all the time we have for today for you.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm definitely not gonna try to answer like what gear to get because this is just too little. There's just too little information in the question. But in terms of acoustic treatment, I don't know how far along the construction process Tony is, but I would avoid equal dimensions on the sides because that's not good for acoustics. Just that that tends to lead to a lot of standing waves having the same dimensions. So if you haven't even started construction yet, try to get rid of that same dimension 15 by 15 thing. You want to double wall at least your the studio to in terms for soundproofing. That's what you want to do.
And what you
Double
want to think
walls.
about, what we would call it here, it's probably just different nomenclature, is floating the room. You want to float the room. You want to create an air
Yeah.
pocket between the inner wall and the outer wall. And then there's, if you really want to get crazy, you put lead lining, on the on the inside of that inside wall. And then there's a type of rubber that we use to push between the studs. And so there's a bunch of pieces there that will keep it from pulling vibration through the wall. The bigger that air gap, the lower the wavelength that's being blocked. So as if you create a 6 to 8 inch 6 to 8 inch air gap, you'll block everything, or almost everything if it's well made, and but it has to be a vacuum, like you want it to be.
We could go
sealed.
down this rabbit hole for hours. If Tony could, is it Tony?
I'm still going to go down there.
If he could, I know, but if he could post a budget for construction and a budget for budget number for equipment in chat, that might be helpful.
I think this is a useful conversation though to remember, is that a lot of people skip over floating the wall, floating the room, and wow, it's like probably that, along with, I would say, the two things that I worry about.
Yeah,
if you float the room, number one, and number two is some kind of diffusion. I just put up sonics everywhere. That's and then I put bass traps in, and then I'm done. But I don't care what it looks like behind me. For a lot of the stuff in my temporary one, I have just sound blankets that are breaking it up. But there's a lot of things that look nice that will absorb it, but they have to be absorbed. Sound is what I worry about, obviously, the most. And then the next thing is just putting a grid in, so that you can actually move lights around. This whole, I'm going to hang, you don't want lights on stands, and you don't want to drill them into the ceiling. You want a grid so you can constantly move your lights around and all kinds of other things, get everything off the ground, so that it's all hanging. And then I would have a mixture of headset mics like this, as well as something like a PR40 for the podcasting that I would swing in to do those, unless you want to just use these headsets. I hate the sound of labs, but you can decide whether that's important to you or not. And so those are the quick things that I would say. Teleprompters, I use prompter people. Use big teleprompters. I use big teleprompters because I don't read off of them. I need to see video. Okay, we'll go pretty quickly now. Jason and Sky. And obviously I build a lot of these, so I have a really strong opinion about these. Jason and Sky.
So if you want a cheap way to do bass traps, I don't remember if it's Amazon or Monoprice. I will put a link in chat that you can really do them very inexpensively. Also, ceiling tile for offices is surprisingly absorbent, and it's pretty
you can
cheap.
get ones that are specifically there to absorb. Right. They're very rough on the outside, on the bottom, and they're useful. Go ahead, Sky.
To Colin's point, my theory is it takes three things to build anything or a system or a process. It's time, quality, and resources / money.
But I think that
and my point is, I need him to say, here's what I want from an example of somebody else, and then you can find somebody to go build you that.
Oh, he said $100,000 budget. So everything I'm talking about is sitting inside that $100,000 budget.
Stepping away. Wow.
No, that's that's a good, it's a reasonable budget for that. I mean, ours range from 15 to about $1 million. Like those are that's the range that I've kind of built these at. So 100,000 is you can get a solid kit for that. Greg and Jeffrey.
Yeah, you can. I mean, as a quick fix, you can get a bunch of Owens Corning panels, and put those up, 3 inches from the wall. Just hang them, around the room, leaving space in between. It's a fairly cheap option, and it's surprisingly effective.
And the thing is that when you're building one, the infrastructure that you build at the beginning is the most important, because you'll keep on adding and getting budgets and everything else to get more electronics. So you want the electronics to be solid, but you would. But getting that room floated with a and diffused and getting a grid hanging from a solid grid from the top. Those things, it's just really, you'll never get to go back and do it. You'll never get to go back and do those things. And I lost a whole studio, my own studio, because they started doing construction right next to me and I hadn't floated the room. That's why I'm so obsessed with it, because I was like, oh, I don't have the money to do it right now. I'll do it later. And yeah, it did one show,
Oh, and raised floors are great for wiring too.
Oh
in
yeah,
in the
raised
data
floors.
center
And you
sense.
you don't have to, you can build them that way, but you can also get ones that are like plastic that are about 1.5 inches thick that you can run across the bottom. And that way you can kind of just move all your cabling around. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Bill.
Get rid of all your glass. If that 15 by 15 room has any windows, get rid of it. And if anything, put an on-air light right on the door. So nobody's looking in, you're not looking out, and everybody knows that you're on air.
Go ahead, Bill, and then Victor.
So I did this with a post and tin hay barn that I turned into my studio, and yeah, that does come up. So this is just some of the grid that was in the studio. Those are IFF studio rails that slip around, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but what we found is that taking the outside envelope of the studio, putting up 3/4 inch MDF, which is very hard. And we had sometimes 6 or 7 guys in there to nail it to the ceiling and just completely enclose it that way, took out a lot of the base because we were just worried about air traffic overhead. We weren't too far from the Scottsdale airport that had a lot of jets landing. There's 1,000 things to think about here.
Yeah, Victor?
So I'll speak about the podcasting part of your question specifically. 2 things. There's a real trend right now of people using SM7 microphones. And although I love the SM7, it is not ideal for podcasting because it requires so much gain. Why build yourself that problem? PR40, RE20, that would be great. Second thing, same microphone for everyone, same mic arms, and a good headphone distribution system. If you think you're ever going to be doing music in that space, then I would get individual headphone mix capability since your budget is ample.
And we're going to have Mickey close it up here.
Yeah, just going back to what Alex was mentioning earlier, and also Colin alluded to, when you're starting like a build from scratch, this is when you build the infrastructure. Like, don't skimp out of that. Like, run all the cables you need ×2. Run, even if you don't need fiber lines, run fiber lines. This is when you want to have all of these already built into the walls, because tearing it down later on will be just a pain. And
I'm sorry, I want to jump in one thing. Run conduit with pull boxes so you can run additional cables when you need to.
Yep, absolutely. Every time I talk to someone who's building, I was talking to someone who's building a huge facility, and I was just like, run at least TAC 12 to every room. Like, just call it a day and just run. You'll be able to. That'll last you a long time. All right, let's go to the next. Oh, one last thing for Mike.
I interrupted Mickey. He had some.
Go ahead, Mike. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Just very last thing. Like, I'm even knowing the budget of $100,000. I won't suggest gear just because I don't know what you want to shoot, what you want to do. Shoot me a message on Discord. Like, we can discuss things.
OC White Pro Booms are in my opinion the best arms. I'm just going to say that last little bit. We'll move on to the next one.
Okay, Brandon Berg, are there differences in audio video quality of implementations of the Zoom SDK versus the full Zoom client?
I don't think there's any difference in the audio and video quality, because the clients are all, Zoom lives in a bubble when you're not. The API, all the SDKs and everything else are getting you to that bubble, but you don't have a lot of control in that bubble. I don't think those things affect the quality. Yeah. Next question.
Vincent Alvarez from Bellingham. Is there a way to record my slides and myself in Zoom at the same time? Also, slides and Farside ISO using EDU Zoom version, educational Zoom version, may be forced to buy vMix or something.
I thought there's a way to, can't it record? Can't you go into the settings and set it to record?
Yeah, when you're sharing the screen, I think it will allow you to do that.
I think you can do ISO records inside of the settings, inside of the recording settings. You should be able to go to ISO and say, I want to record my screen, the gallery, I think, and the speaker view. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly. But that's only available on the Zoom cloud recording, if I remember correctly.
That might be the case. Yeah. So I think that's the only way I know of doing those ISOs without starting to apply hardware to it to make that work. Next question.
Yeah, Mike wants to know, what are the rules for the coffee video? How long can it be? Where do we post the links in Discord?
There is a education challenges in the education section. There's no limit to the length, although I would recommend it being short. We have to watch them. So but we'll discuss them if they. I think that I don't know if we'll play the whole video tomorrow for each one of these. We'll try. I got to look at the time and how long it will take. We may start it early, so we may only do an hour of Q&A for Saturday, general Q&A, and then do the film festival in there, and then do the regular education discussion. So if we do that, I can play them all in full length.
Even if I can't make tomorrow, can I just shoot
you have to submit it, but you have to do it today because I'm gonna pull them all down. Okay, I'm gonna grab them all today, and so I'm gonna get them ready to play back. So you have to sort that out. All right, go ahead and send it. All right, next question.
Yeah, I'm holding a couple of these educational ones for the next hour, I think.
Yep.
Larry Tang asks, any recommendations for anti-glare or non-reflective material for large flat screens? The host has a large flat screen in the center of the frame and is presenting materials from it. The opposite end has a large flat screen as well as for 49 participants.
I will say that I don't have any specific surface for it other than I hate putting screens behind me now. Like I just try to avoid it. Like if I'm going to present something, I just want to cut to it. I don't want to have it sitting behind me. I don't want to have it. That's why I don't like and I don't like all the other things. I don't need it to be behind me. I just want it to be like when I want to show it to you, I'll cut to it. And when I don't want to show it to you, I'll take it out. But having it sit behind you, I think just it's hard to read. It's hard to look at. It's hard to, just cut to it. In my opinion. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I don't have an opinion on this, but I want to give Larry Tang credit for him asking the question this way. The question first and then bringing details afterwards. That helps everybody in reading the question and understanding the question.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great model. Good. Thanks for pointing that out, Jeffrey. Is asking that question ahead of time and then giving us more information makes it a lot easier. So good work, Guy.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll help much in this particular arena, but angling things, changing the lights around, but also circular polarizer filter. You can turn it and adjust it until you dial in that exact reflection. So that might be something to look at. It's going to knock out about a half stop or a stop.
But yeah, I really try to stay away from the whole information behind you is a skeuomorphic thing from I had a blackboard or I had something that I wanted to draw on. And as we keep on moving towards virtual events, we'll stop using that because we don't need it. Next question.
Alton Christensen, iZotope filters are on sale. Mixing interviews for TV. Which filters or bundles are suggested for that use?
As much as you can afford. It's iZotope. They're great filters. Anyway, Jason.
iZotope is straight away the very best at anything they do. They do magnificently well. CEO is one of the smartest guys I know, and good Lord, you cannot go wrong.
Yeah, they're great. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would go with at the minimum RX Advanced, and if you could afford it, the whole post-production suite. But don't go for the basic RX Advanced minimum.
Advanced is a great place to start. Victor.
Good.
Same.
I'm good.
Same. Okay.
Mickey covered it.
Next question.
Yes, Steve Bahaz. I have an adjustable standing desk. Is there a one tripod solution to accommodate two fixed height mounts, one for sitting level and another for standing level, approximately 15 inches in the height difference?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Sorry to be a smartass, but get a sit-stand desk. That's what I'm doing.
Well, no. I think that the issue is that he has a adjustable standing desk, and what he wants is the camera to have two different versions of the camera. The temptation would be to attach your camera to the desk, but it'll vibrate all the time when you're touching the desk. So you'll have this little shake all the time, which is why you don't want it attached to the desk. I can't think of the name of it. We've used rail systems that basically go up and down. That you put the camera on, and then you can set it, and it just goes up and then down, and you can adjust it up and down and everything else. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I ran into somebody that did something pretty interesting. They had a tripod. It was a small stand tripod, so the legs didn't go past the lowest part of the desk. Then they took it was like a threaded bolt and like a loop, and then they padded that loop. They put the tripod in there on one of the extension sides, and then every time they raised the desk, the tripod raised with the desk and lowered with the desk, which was really interesting. And then, of course, with the padding, that helps keep the shake. Of course, if you're raising and lowering, that's going to give shake all the time. But it seemed to look a lot better, and especially when he was tapping the desk, it wasn't causing that much transfer.
That much or none? like for me, if
I
it's
didn't
any, it's
I didn't
not
see any
enough.
transfer.
Okay,
It
yeah.
seems
didn't
like
see
it
any
would be highly dependent on the quality of the tripod as
Yeah.
to whether you could get it to slide
Go ahead, Bill.
effectively.
Bill, and then Jason.
An inexpensive vertical mounting option. Manfrotto Bogan, same thing, makes something called an auto pole, which you can stretch out top to bottom from ceiling to floor, and then there's a lever that presses it up, and then you can hang things off of that. It's a quick and easy way to mount things on a vertical surface.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Bill's answer is excellent. I've used them in the past. I am actually clipping to the desk, and the way that I did it for stability is it basically looks like, you know, a goalpost, like you know, the end of a football field. And I have a mouse pad that is the size of my desk, and it is enough isolation. I mean, my mic is bouncing right now there. So if I really hit it, I'll move, but not very badly. I don't
But
know.
there's, I mean, my temptation would probably to get some 80/20 and figure out some kind of clamping system that lets me just loosen it and move it up and tighten it, or something like that. That'd be relatively quick. I can mark it, probably take you a minute. That's probably the cheapest, simplest, most secure way to attach something is some 80/20. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I have a standing desk, and I use these little Ulanzi, they're called. That's a tripod, but this desk is rock solid. It's got a shelf there. It's got here, and it raises and lowers.
I just love when Paul shows us a little bit more of the cave. That's all.
Well, Alex, I have a 5,000 square foot house out in the country
full of
where all my
toys.
equipment is, and this is my condo, and my wife severely restricts me here on what I can have.
But this is the junior setup.
All right. Yeah.
So this is the compact version here.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very good. All right. Next question.
So Paul wants to know, history question, Alex, what years were you and Leo in Sonoma County, and what were those years like?
I won't go too far down this path, but I mean, I lived in Sonoma. I lived in Petaluma for I guess four years. The 2010 to 2014, then I moved to Pittsburgh I tried to persuade my wife to move to Pittsburgh because I grew up there. And didn't take. So spent a year there. And the coldest winter in 20 years from a Southern California girl. She was not amused. So anyway, and then I came back and moved into Marin. But it was good. It was good. I mean, I think that it was fun to ride my bike to work because I was in 40% of the brick house. So we had a studio there, and so we had, so we were shooting out there. We both Leo and I at the time were kind of growing out of it. I knew that it was going to end because we couldn't fit anymore into what we were doing. We were at, I don't know, 5,000 square feet or something, but it was like we were going to blow up. And so we moved it, had to move to a warehouse. And Leo was growing at the time a lot too. So anyway, so that it was good though. I mean, it was, you learn a lot. I think there's a lot of cross pollination between Twit and us that we learned a lot about what we do here. I would tend to take, if you haven't guessed, the heavy-handed view of things, of how to do things, but they did a lot of things that were more scrappy, but definitely worked well. And so I think that it was, we definitely learned a little bit from each other, but it's a lot of fun. I miss it when I'm not on Mac break, but right now I just can't do something on the weekdays at that time. So I'm looking forward to getting back when things slow down a little bit.
Yeah, I lived there in 78, 77 through 1979. Totally different time.
Yeah,
time period. We have no overlap at all.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right, next question.
Ashirav, what are some good options for a single person to record audio, guitar, and vocals outdoors while recording video on an iPhone? Is there an Alex version and a Colin version of this kit?
I mean, I would have some outboard recorder not going into the phone. So whether it's a Zoom on the lower end or a Mix Pre, on the higher end, to capture that, and then I would let the camera just record what it's going to record as far as audio goes, or you can send it in somehow. But the main thing is then you just use that audio and the camera to sync the audio that you recorded in your external recorder back to it. Trying to pile all that into your iPhone is painful. Like it'll work. It'll be a lot of gack, and it'll never be quite as good as it could have been. Greg and then Jeffrey. Then Bill, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for me, it would depend on what the usage would be. If this is just some kind of vanity thing, then I would, frankly, I would just throw a little video micro me onto the phone and shoot it. But
I mean,
if it's
one thing you can look
something
at
else more pro, then
Yeah, if you want something professional, that would be it. If you want something really quick and it's only 2 channels, the other thing you can look at is something like a Ceramonic. Ceramonic makes interfaces that are relatively inexpensive that will go into Lightning or into TRS. And I've used those for remote kits in the past. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Bill.
A lot of musicians I know that are just taking their iPhones and the sound is doing great. It also depends on if you have acoustic or electric guitar for using, if you're using a microphone or anything. Some people, what they'll do is they'll put their small PA behind them and then they'll push it through the iPhone. IK Multimedia also makes of a few great items. I use the iRig Pro Duo, which is great because you can bring in 2 channels separate into the iPhone through USB-C or through Lightning if you do that. So, and of course, Ceramonic, just like Alex said, that's a great program or a great.
Bill, and then Jason.
This works absolutely wonderful, and it's real simple as long as you use things that record both audio and video at the same time. Don't try this with GoPros, because if you do that, you're going to have all sorts of synchronization problems because there won't be any sound at all. So that's why slates were invented. This is called double system recording, separate audio and video. Doesn't affect the phones because they're always recording audio and you can sync by audio. But for cameras that don't do audio, do yourself a favor, buy a small slate.
GoPros do audio.
Oh, well, I was thinking of them in the plastic cases where
Right.
sometimes you don't get anything.
Yeah. Jason.
If I were to suggest something halfway between an Alex and a Colin, and by the way, just as an aside, I love that yin yang of because it's such a wide gap.
Mm-hmm.
The Zoom H6 is a fantastic multi-track recorder. The preamps are a little bit not great,
Noisy.
but they will sound absolutely better than anything else for what you pay for them.
Next question.
Here we go. Clicking. Sky wants to know, has anyone seen PlutoTV as a streaming media space? It's owned by Viacom and is distributing a lot of cable alternative channels for free. This is Viacom's 5G future strategy. Who's going to win the content distribution wars?
We will, as viewers.
I was gonna say that, and I didn't want to be a smartass.
It's going to be great for us, not so great for businesses. Go ahead, Colin.
I don't see Pluto TV as much of a 5G strategy. I think it's more of a dumping ground for their back catalog that isn't generating significant enough syndication royalties anymore. So I wouldn't consider it a meaningful player in the space.
Without interactivity, I just don't think that broadcast has. Without interactivity, I don't think broadcast has any future. Like, it has to figure that out. And to be clear, the first presentations I saw on interactivity was 1993. It's not like they haven't been thinking about it. They just can't figure out how to do it, And so, we had Zing and some other stuff that we saw in the early 90s talking about it. So everyone knows that it's coming. They just can't figure out how to get it into their business model. And so, it's not something new or even interesting, other than not many people are doing it. Go ahead, Sky, and then Jeffrey, and then Bill, and then Paul.
I'll come back after Paul and Bill.
Yeah, go ahead. Jeffrey, and then Bill.
I like the Cats channel, but seriously, this might be a great way for some channels to actually start their launching point to see if they can get an audience then to go into broadcast TV. So that's a good possibility there.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
If there's a battle between media companies coming toward the internet or internet companies coming toward media, I'd bet on the latter, because as you're seeing, Apple did bad TV for a while, but they're just getting to know what they're doing. And now they're out there with great custom content, and they own the entire pipeline behind it. So that would be my bet. I think the IT companies are going to do this better than the old broadcast world.
The issue
I
is,
wasn't.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Paul, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I wasn't impressed with Pluto TV like Colin. I don't even think it's in the solar system.
I don't think it's a planet. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. So, Sky, go ahead.
Well, that interaction, I think, is the key. And as you're talking about the broadcast, versus the narrowcast, and what is your audience willing to pay for? So follow the money. And I think the advertising model is what it's been a push rather than a pull of marketing. So those phrases I'm really living into. But Pluto was a friend of mine from LA asked me that question, so I just thought I'd.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that just throwing old content up. I mean, there is some value to it. I mean, I'm watching older shows with my kids because I think it's fun to watch stuff to see whether it aged well, and they seem to enjoy it. But I think that the problem is that I think that advertising is toast, not because of us, but because of the next generation that isn't used to it and is largely unwilling to watch it. And so that's the real problem that broadcasters have, is that they're on a quickly sinking island. And they need to, and the brands need to use advertising right now to figure out how they're going to build a community around their brand before they don't have access to that. And that's the same problem that print had. I talked about it earlier this week. Print had the opportunity. They had all these subscribers to their magazines. What they needed to do at that moment was to convert those to an online audience. And they didn't, because they just didn't believe that it was actually ever going to go away. They had 50 years of success, and they don't see any reason to change and to make those investments. And, they're all gone now, or most of them are, and they're going to keep, and broadcast is just going through the same thing. Next question.
James Babbitt asks, for the Countryman E6 mics, do you configure the options for cable diameter, flexibility, pattern, and sensitivity? And do you use the directional end caps?
I have the flat directional end cap on. I didn't customize it more than that when I requested it, other than it be black. So it's the cable diameter is the thinnest one I think that I've used. I didn't ask for anything thicker, I have to admit. And this is the H6. It's not the E6. And I think that the H6 has far less options. I think it's just it's an H6. The only thing you have that you change are the little heads. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. In terms of cable diameter, I'd always go with the thicker one. I think it's 2 millimeters. I mean, like it's tiny. Like if you don't have to be discreet about the mic, like if it's not something for theater, then yeah, just get the one that's more robust. For the
and that's for the E6. Mine's an H6, and I said I think the H6 is one size fits all. I think, other than what the end is. Like I don't think there's a lot of customization. The E6 has got a lot more customization to it, which is the one over one ear rather than over both.
Yeah, and regarding the pattern, like if it's a headset mic, like 80-90% of the time, I'll just go with Omni.
Oh yeah, Omni is there's a whole bunch of issues with the cardioid versions of those, or the directional. The directional will pick up all kinds of any kind of face noise and everything else. If it does swing a little bit, you're gonna have problems. It doesn't sound as natural. Unless you're in a really noisy environment. I mean, even when we have people up on stage, we almost never use the Omnis. The directionals, we always use the Omnis because they just sound better. Jason?
The sound guys, feel free to disagree with me. In my experience, the smaller the microphone, the more critical it is that you don't get a cardioid pattern, because it just ends up sounding so constrained.
I will agree with that. Yep. Next question.
Yeah, Hasmuk wants to know, he knows Zoom well enough. What do we need to know to be aware of in terms of Teams? I'm a guest on a Teams webinar. I'm thinking of using Zoom to prep for that. Any minefields I need to be aware of?
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, the remove person and delete and make person active buttons are next to each other. So just be careful when you want to activate somebody. Also, you can pin multiple people at the same time. So you can kind of do a switching thing. It's fairly robust. Just you got to have a big fat pipe.
Yeah, Greg.
My view is make sure you know where the leave meeting button is. I hate Teams.
Go ahead, John.
So Colin and Leland and I played with Teams about a month ago, and the same restrictive behavior rotation where you need the Microsoft account and then you log in and they're not part of your, like your ActiveX directory. All those same sort of issues that we had with Skype, we see in Teams.
Yeah. All right, Sky.
Just remember that Teams is a single item in a suite of products, unlike Zoom is a vertical within doing a really good job doing one thing. Teams has got all kinds of other things. And again, Skype is its older cousin, but
Great.
keep that in mind.
older, really messed up cousin.
No, I think if you're completely invested in the Microsoft system, already Microsoft ecosystem already, Teams is probably okay because it does, it does incorporate a lot of these things. But to me, it's incredibly clunky in terms of navigation. And I maybe I'm just a stupid, but I can never get what I want out of it.
Think of it as a language. If you think of it as a language, you have to relearn. You just got to find where they hid
And it's a horrible language, in my opinion. Go ahead, Jason.
It doesn't hurt any more than any of the other Microsoft, suite.
Okay, that's not a very good one. All right, next question.
Michael Vosbein wants to have your recommendations for protecting against power surges, please. I use Furman line conditioners and just had a lightning strike that only fried a few things. I presume there's no way to protect against that?
Well, a lot of UPSs will have, they will protect against that. They'll take the hit for you. I mean, typically, if you have things that are important behind a UPS with surge protection, I've never seen a UPS pass even a lightning strike. I have had a lightning strike nearby, and it definitely caused my UPS to almost catch fire, but it didn't pass the voltage down the line. So it was melted. Like it melted some components, but it was that's the only time I've ever seen it. But generally when we've had other spikes, we haven't had any issues. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jason.
Yeah, definitely something like a Furman should protect you from lightning strikes. It will fry itself instead of frying your equipment. But just be sure that nothing else no other piece of equipment that's interconnected together isn't running through a Furman. Because like say, for example, if you're running AV equipment and that's running through a Furman, but say your computer isn't, and that computer is interconnected to gear that's going through the Furman, then you still have a leak there. Yeah.
And you want to look for what you're looking for UPSs, by the way, are ones that are powering the battery, and the battery is powering everything that you have. Other ones will go straight through and only engage the battery when you run out of power, and that is not as secure for not just lightning strikes, which is a very extreme case, but voltage changes and other types of surges can damage your equipment in a way that if you're always passing through the battery again, the battery won't last as long, but it will protect you and give you clean power. Because a lot of times you have things that won't kill your stuff today, but over 6 months will slowly damage your equipment. And so that's what you have to be careful of. Is it's not just having power that's consistent, but it's clean power that is perfect for your electronics. Otherwise, your power supplies and all kinds of other things can go wrong when things are fluctuating. Jason and then Jeffrey.
Oh man, there are so many questions. That was a great answer. I'm just gonna cede.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Expanding on Mickey's, never plug a surge protector strip into a surge protector strip, because that can not only not protect, but also could even cause a fire.
Last question before the end of the hour.
Yeah, John Broman wants to know what happened to the screen that has the questions and the video of the person talking. I'm using the Mukana mobile and is not showing the video.
Now, if you go into the chat, let's see here. This is the, hold on. You just need to this is the link to the desktop version. And so I put it in there. That's what you need. All right. We are now going to, if you are an educator or someone wants to be part of the education panel, go ahead and raise your digital hand, and we'll bring you in here. Do a quick mic check. And Mickey, do you want to go ahead and start mic check? So I'll keep on bringing people in as they come in.
Alrighty. Okay. Okay. Let's start off with Michael and then Chris Clark afterwards.
All right. Good morning from San Francisco, and it's not too smoky today. The weather has improved, and I'm looking forward to talking to everyone today. Let's see. Let's bump that up a little bit more, just a couple notches. All right. And how's that sounding?
Might have overshot just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
The slightest nudge down.
There we go.
We'll move on to Chris and then Tim McKee. Muted, Chris.
Zoom mute.
Good morning, everyone from Tempe, Arizona. I'm happy to hear that the Bay Area air is more breathable. The little onshore breeze always helps. Now what you need is a little gentle rain for about 2 days.
Alrighty, that's a good check. Thank you, Tim, and then Jeff Francis.
Glad to be back on the panel after being in Mukana land for a week or so.
Nice, good check, Jeff, and then Father Bruce after.
Good morning, everyone. Checking on this Countryman E6, boosting up a little bit. Looks like I'm a few dB under. Not sure why that is, but we'll boost up just a little bit. How's that doing, Mickey?
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you, Bruce.
Good morning, everyone from Naples. This is a good chance. Hi, Jeff. How are you this morning? I get a chance. This is a good way for me to get a chance to talk to my son and see him and be proud of him. So how's that sound today?
All right, Bruce, do you have level control on your end? If you do, bump down a bit.
Bump down a bit. Okay, let me get this. How does that too much? How does that sound? Is it better? Let me see.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think we're
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
good. All right. Thank you.
Great. And so one thing we do that's a little special for the educators is we release another Discord link. So there it is in the chat. So if you're an educator and you're not on Discord, please jump on, or anybody can jump on. Just remember that you'll be in restricted status until you have first name space last name. And that lasts for half an hour. So go do it right now. So anyway, so you can go ahead and jump into that. If you have questions, this is the time to ask them, not at the end of the hour, but at the beginning of the hour. We've got 5 or 6 questions right now that we'll get kicked off with. But if you have any more additional questions, let's go ahead and start putting them in there. And otherwise, Phil, let's jump to the first question.
Great. Prima Q. Given technology advances, artificial intelligence, etc., is teaching coding relevant for K-12, K-12 education?
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I work on a bunch of projects through Berkeley where we teach, where we have curriculum for K-12. I think it is super relevant in that there are, it is something that I believe is a really powerful skill in the way that we teach people, biology and physics, but not something that necessarily I personally think needs to be required. The reason that I think code is possibly one of the coolest things is that when you learn how to simulate something, which is not terribly complicated, it's just the process of learning to write enough code, you can use that to explore just about any subject. And there's nothing that replaces, the hands-on physics labs, but coding is a skill that lets you explore statistics in a really interactive way, calculus, but also even things like photography and graphics. And so some of the stuff that I work on is taking basic coding skills and making it engaging in a discipline that students are already interested in. And you can do that because coding is software without much additional cost, which is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, then Sky, then Colin.
Yeah, I would expand even a little bit more onto that. You see in movies, the old school mathematician is like, math is pure logic. And this is, yes, but coding is the modern form of that. And what it allows you to do is truly teach yourself how to think in a way that is insanely valuable, even if you don't think you're a particularly good coder. I am not a gifted coder. I still do it anyway because it's important.
Sky.
Michael, I'm curious if learning coding is similar to the learning, memorizing your times tables. If it's that kind of a tool versus a GUI interface like a Lego kit like even the Lego software that's all GUI user interface of modules and things like that. So how deep should somebody need to go in this convenience environment that we're in?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
I think that there are aspects that are a little bit like memorization, and I think that's just learning how to take a tool that you use and think critically about it and apply it to your workflow. And the example that I can give around that from yesterday is generating 150 motion title screens for a conference that I worked on. And they all, title, presenters, URL type thing. And there's an app that does this, but the app is buggy. But it also turns out that like with a little bit of understanding how coding works, you can open a motion file, figure out what to find and replace, and write your own CSV file in like 30 minutes. And so I think everyone, when you learn the skills, you will find places in your life that you can apply these things in useful ways. What I would say though is that, like Jason said, the logic, the workflow, the thinking about breaking down a problem, that is very much not a memorization skill. And that really just takes practice. And I think that that's one of those things where it is a different way of approaching a problem, but I also find it very valuable skill.
My children were taught in a classical education and a homeschool concept, and they were taught Latin. And I thought that's crazy. But the reality is it taught logic first. Oh, and Greg apparently was taught Latin as well. So
I was taught Latin as well. It was part
I
of
was
my.
taught Latin as well.
Yeah. So we're all.
Bring
a lot
it.
of us
Bring
got that.
what does that have to do with anything?
I don't know. It was
Logic?
useful.
Logic?
Yeah, I think
you brought it up.
Colin and Chris.
Oh, Jason pretty much touched on it. Coding allows you to employ critical thinking without being taught what critical thinking is. And more important than coding is debugging, because that's what forces you to work through these logical processes to figure out what went wrong. Yeah,
Chris.
Critical thinking is the key. Thank you.
I just wanted to say a word in favor of learning just enough coding to be dangerous, or to have a conversation with a peer who knows a lot more about coding, and you don't come across as a completely illiterate person in the coding world. It's a little bit like a year of high school Spanish for this crowd.
Touching on that, the same thing applies in business. Don't ever, as a manager, don't ever ask your employees to do things that you're not prepared or capable of doing yourself. Ask them to do it because it'll save time to have them do it. They may be better at it than you are, but you want to be competent at it one way or another. And also because you don't want people to snow you in terms of, I can do this in 3 weeks. No, you can't do that in 3 weeks. That's not a reasonable thing to a reasonable time frame. And you would know that based on a basic understanding of software development and the software development workflows.
Pete Carroll does not pay his quarterback because Pete Carroll can throw a ball.
Hands. We're starting to get a little loose. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Roscoe.
So Collins, the idea of debugging is great because the skills you learn in debugging are very close to the skills of troubleshooting tech and computers, and we all know that we need to do a lot of that. Also, Sky, Latin, I took Latin. I learned English grammar by taking Latin. So you learned how language is structured.
Roscoe and then Bruce.
I learned Puella es pocarissima, which is great if you're trying to pick up a Latin girl. Anyways, we were talking about coding as an individual sport, and think of coding as a team sport. It's great for getting people to interact, work on a project. It's very precise. Everyone has to come to an agreement on what the finished code is going to look like. But just that dialogue, that interaction that goes on, is an invaluable skill.
Right, Bruce and then Michael.
I have put in a story here of how coding saved my bacon way back. I had forgotten to calculate on the computer and run on the computer some very important data that I had to print in my dissertation. And when I found out I had to do it, I had a choice of either doing the entire thing by hand or of doing programming it. I hesitate to say, but I had to do it in Fortran. And that saved me probably 2 weeks of constant work to get that all done by being able to have written in Fortran rather than doing it all by hand.
Yeah, Michael.
The one thing that, reading the question again, the part about with technologies like AI that I would add is that, there is ideally, right, we would be in this world where we don't need to have advanced knowledge to make our tools do what we want to do. But we still do. And so with things like AI, the tools will get easier to use and they will improve, but the complexity and the level of problems that we encounter will increase. And so, one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about, especially with high school students, is as you learn to read, and as what you read is determined by some other algorithm, how do you critically understand what the computer is doing and ask questions so that it is not just a black box? And you are, in a lot of ways, breaking down and demystifying that black box so that you have some control in your own life over how you can apply it and use it. And that is one of the other important things that you get to talk about. You don't need to necessarily know how to program well to do that, but I think it adds to the experience.
I mean, I know a lot of times we talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic as something that's really important. The things I worry about with my kids, if school's not going to fix it, I will. In certain areas, things that I think that they need to know how to do is cook. So my kids learn how to cook. They need to know how to make things like with their hands. Just be able to just be crafty. They need to know how to code because that's making things with their hands. Just I don't look at it as they're going to someday be a coder or they're going to go. It's just another way to figure out how to solve problems at home. Like all of my coding has been my first coding was to build non-player characters for Dungeons and Dragons because they don't last very long, and rolling the dice was really a pain in the neck. I could just have it. I could have my Apple IIe just print them, and so I just printed another one that was going to die soon, and did trajectories. I programmed a radio station with it, but it was like over 2 weeks. I just sat down in HyperCard and built something that would program the whole radio station, because I didn't want to pay $6,000, for that. And so I've always just used coding as a way to solve some issue, so I don't look at it I just look at it as a basic life skill. Other things like, drawing, I wish I was better at drawing. I draw a little bit, but, I think that kids need to learn that, reading until they can learn to read until they can read to learn. To me, that's all I care about is with my kids. I don't care about them having some high English or whatever. I think they all have to know how to make music. It's fun, and it's just, it exercises a part of their brain that they have to that won't get exercised if that doesn't happen. And then the most important one is they learn how to interact with people, and I think that we kind of get into this whole testing and all these other things, and we lose track of these are the things that they'll use every day. The things that I just listed are the things that they will use absolutely every day, and when they forget all the other stuff they went to school, those are the things that are going to impact their life. And so I think coding definitely fits into that. I don't think it needs to be something that they learn every day, all day, if they're not interested. I think but understanding how to kind of piece that together is, my son got excited because he found an old Raspberry Pi, and he's got it all sitting in there, and he's playing with it and trying to figure out what he's going to do with it. And I love that. I love that he's just kind of figuring that stuff out. I'll go ahead. Jason, last thing, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, one of the best example that I can think of, just because he brought up AI. AI is the most misunderstood, worst term for that sector of ML. And the best example I can think of is in Silicon Valley, I think was the show where it was hot dog, not a hot dog. And it was designed to be nothing other than an image recognition thing. But all he did was train his library on hot dogs.
Yeah. Next question.
I would add money management is an important thing for kids. That's a big, All right, Kenny Hampton, I'm looking for information about WOVA as an event management service, and as our university is planning a virtual homecoming event. Pros and cons of this service. I have an experience with that.
I don't have any experience with that.
Yeah,
go ahead,
I've
Michael.
got,
You have to go ahead, Phil.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Phil.
I spent 2 hours that I'll never get back on my life from trying to just find out how much it costs. They insist that you have at least 2 phone calls in person with tech support and sales engineers before they will even tell you how much it costs. And then even then, there's cagey about it. So I never got to actually demoing the product because I got so frustrated with their onboarding sales procedure.
Wow. That's
Maddening.
amazing. Michael, you're going to say?
Yeah, I've used it for a few events that were in-person events, because it's been around for a while. And you can roughly think of it as a social network for your event plus a schedule. Fortunately, I was not involved in any of the cost or setup discussions. But for a large conference, the integration thing is getting just your CSVs and stuff of events and seeing them. I think the web schedule platform stuff works. The mobile app covers what it needs to do, but it's not a particularly great mobile app. But at the time, it was one of the better options for like an interactive social app. That was, 2 or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago was the most recent. So I, they have this whole virtual stuff that I have not played with, but what they show right now doesn't look particularly unique, is what I would say.
Next question. Oh, you gonna say, Colin?
I I was going to say that was a sense that I got in the 5 minutes I spent looking at their website, that they're in the middle of pivoting to a virtual conferencing solution and they don't have anything meaningful. And I was laughing when Phil was describing the quote process, because yeah, if they don't list the prices on the website in a sane way, it's not a service that you want to consider.
And I think that almost every service that is a physical thing that was out there for the last 10 years that's trying to pivot to virtual will not survive. I'll say 95% will not survive, because it's just not the same thing. It's not the same. It's not going to be the same experience. And them trying to glop that on physical, what they did in physical worlds to the virtual, is just going to be this ugly thing that will eventually shake off. It's not like they're going to be, but I think that, I mean, the kind of events that we're designing right now, that I'm bidding on it at least right now for next year. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never want to go back to physical events. Like what we're able to like scale, and reach 1 million people at, for, a fraction of the cost. And you're just like, why would, but it requires you to completely unthink it. You have to stop thinking about physical events, like, and trying to reproduce them. But once you get out of that limitation, it's so exciting, because the technology is getting so much better. Things like, Zoom and putting it in the cloud and replicating it, and tying those all in. It's complicated, but so is doing physical events. So anyway, next question.
Yeah, Prima says, yesterday Sky mentioned the pivot from verticals to horizontals. Please explain with regard to using technology for teaching and learning.
I have no idea what that means.
Well, you were talking
about. I don't even know what we were talking about.
Well, it's rather than doing one conference with 3,000 people jammed into a hotel, you flopped that expense, and now you're doing 3,000 people over 30 days for the same money,
or a year. Like the thing is that we've seen some of our partners have been just switching what used to be your conference fee to a yearly fee, and then they're just going to do stuff every week. And they're not, and they're not, and there's a huge number of people that have been taking that on. And so it's a way more interesting model, because we can now build community in a way that we couldn't there. I mean, there's a bunch of us now that are buying stuff from each other, that are getting things sent over, that are moving things around, doing business together. All these things have happened over time in a way that I don't think happened over 3 days. Go ahead, Jeff.
Relating that to teaching, I could see vertical as the one-to-many lecturing, and the horizontal as getting the group work, the group project, the discussion, students helping other students. That's one way to think of that vertical to horizontal shift. That's not the technology one, but that's what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
Second what Jeff said, it's about community building, which you can't do on a one-shot TED Talk or lecture. It's about cultivating the connections among the participants and with the leader, and getting something started. I keep coming back to that it's not really about covering all the material in one blast, but it's about getting something started, which may go in divergent directions for each of your 3,000 listeners.
I mean, for me, 20 years ago, when we started doing that in the Pixel Corps, it was really, I just looked at myself as a curator. My job is, I've got 2,000 people that are figuring stuff out together. Very quickly, they outran what I could do. like very quickly they were, all you had to do is just keep everybody focused going the same direction, and you just try to, get them all roughly the same direction. And they're all like learning, and we'd have, 350 people learning how to do HDR and 300 people that learning how to, or 500 over here that were building 3D models, and they learn from each other. And we just had to figure out a way to, it's a matter of containing that reaction and keeping it moving with some order is more important than one person to many. Go ahead, Sky.
It feels like a long game versus a short game philosophy or concept. And I think it's also, what I'm hearing is it's a relational experience versus a transactional experience. So those are great. Those are great things. Thank you.
One thing to when we keep on talking about flipping the classroom, we're experimenting with that tomorrow with Final Cut and Motion. I'm going to post these into the thing. So these are the movies. This is about the highest quality version of this experiment that we could do. We're going to talk about Final Cut, but what we're going to talk about will relate to the things I just posted into Mukana. Those are the links, and Orlando put them into the Final Cut section of Discord as well. But as teachers, you want to look at that, because that is, I'm not saying you should do it at this level, but you have a breakdown of all the new features from Final Cut and Motion all in a short video with Steve and Mark. And then Steve and Mark are going to come and just do a discussion. We discussed it this week. So Steve Martin and Mark Spencer and Steve Bays and I were going back and forth about what are we going to do on Saturday. And they were like, well, we've already got recordings of what we're going to talk about. Why would we do that again? And so let's just post the videos, and we're going to email these out to everyone to make sure that they know it's there. But then we're just going to have a big discussion. We're going to have a whole bunch of people interested in Final Cut talking about it. And so they already have seen the videos. And then so it's really an extension of this idea of flipping the classroom at its far end, of bringing world experts in and having them do videos before we get there. And so as educators, I just want to let you know that that's happening tomorrow after the education hour, or 2 hours. I think we're going to end up doing coffee. So just so you know, the coffee is going to happen. Coffee discussion is going to happen at 8 in the morning. So tomorrow, and then at 9, we're just going to have we'll have the same general conversation, but we're only going to have an hour of it. And then we're going to go into Final Cut and Motion. So, but just warning you, the coffee, if you want to get your coffee submission in, it's got to be done tonight, because I'm going to get up tomorrow morning really early. I'm going to pull all the rest of the videos in, and we'll have a little coffee hour. We'll all want coffee by the end of it. Go ahead, Sky, real quick, and then we'll move on.
I was on Steve Martin's show when he was housed in the podcasting in Northridge, and I saw the video, and it's like, oh, he's got a white beard too. I'm not used to people getting old.
Next question.
Yeah, Prima gets the most valuable question asker of the day. She's got a festival of questions coming up here in a second.
Prima's keep making sure that we don't run out of questions. All right,
right.
Great. Thank
Charter
you.
schools struggling to open this fall, some uncomfortable making transitions to online education. Children are receiving Chromebooks, but many don't have internet access. What is your advice?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, most school districts are just going to Verizon and buying MiFis, the basically old cell phones that turn into hotspots. And that's, but I've seen articles where there's school buses now that are going to, neighborhoods that really have bad Wi-Fi, and that whole school bus is loaded with Wi-Fi transmitters and stuff. So, I mean, it's got to be done on the enterprise level. As an individual, there's, obviously that individual didn't have the resources to get good internet. So somebody has to step in and help them.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Very first thing to do to save on internet access is give up on synchronous instruction. Move to asynchronous so that they have time to download the materials that they need, and then they can interact through text discussions. Keep things to low bandwidth.
Yeah.
Include an audio only version with a PDF of slides if you're doing sort of that, rather than a narrated video. Have that as well if they have the bandwidth to download it, but give them the option to have the low data
remember
bandwidth.
that some of them can go somewhere, whether it's near a Starbucks or a library or something to download those things, but they need to be able to, you shouldn't, it's not fair to the students who don't have access for any of the raw information they'll be tested on to be in the synchronous classroom. Like, they have to be able to acquire those asynchronously and work through it. The synchronous classroom should augment that. And I think this is among many reasons why the classrooms are going to be forced to be flipped, because it's just it's exclusionary to do that. Jason, and then Michael.
I also have to remind people, even if your libraries are closed, the Wi-Fi still works.
I've uploaded many files by driving in front of Starbucks.
Me too.
Yeah, he's just like, I know where all the Starbucks are because they have Wi-Fi. You pull up in front of them, you log in, and off you go. Michael.
Yeah, it really depends on the scenario. But if you have a set of material that you can lean on already, so a textbook that comes with the videos, maybe some of your own, or maybe you can pull them. Never underestimate the power of SneakerNet and the ability to get cheap USB drives and either mail them out or let parents come and pick them up as well. It definitely requires a timeline and planning to be able to do that. But if you have materials that can be picked up in person, that can always be an option to get people that, and just give it to the students and the parents with a schedule of when you might need this. But that can be an option.
Sky.
We're going to see a tidal surge of internet on the internet superhighway when everybody comes rushing back into the internet.
I guess all I say is that I do think that the pressure is now really building up for internet to become a utility. I think that we need to really strongly consider that. And I'm not usually like, oh, we should create utilities out of everything, but this is getting absurd. To not make it a basic requirement that people. And I think it should be. I think we should get over this and just do 1 gig fiber to every house, and we just pay for it. And then we figured out we spread the pain. That's how utilities work, and just stop fiddling with 5G.
But is there a way to do that without getting the government meddling then in governing the internet?
Well, utility is not them doing it, but I think
that they get to oversee it. If
we would like to say that there's some way to do that, but it has failed. If the companies had figured it out and done what needed to get done, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Oh, sure.
And so they have failed. And so the only reason I'm saying this is because I don't have any confidence that these companies will do what is right. They're going to try to milk every moment out of this, and they're not going to invest in the places where my parents live. They're not going to, and so it's time for us to just at least threaten to force them.
But they already own the FCC. So I'm sorry.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, Chris, go ahead, Chris. Oh, you're muted.
Forgot my deathless point.
Okay. Tim, and then John, and we'll move. And then Jason, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Can Chromebooks come with a data plan like iPads and netbooks used to?
I don't know if they do. I don't think they have a cellular connection.
That would be a pretty cool thing for these schools that are trying to deal with that. Instead of having a separate hotspot, just send the students the Chromebook that has the data plan attached.
Or send them an iPad.
You can put in a USB cell card, and some of them do have cellular access, but you still got to pay for it.
Yeah, go ahead, John, and then Jason, and then Bruce.
Yeah, being the professor here, a little historical, but there's a thing called E-rate, which is collected by taxes that against redistributed technology, and sometimes hardware, sometimes access to schools. Mm-hmm. In California, we have a thing called CNIC, which was a not-for-profit that was a group originally of the universities and colleges, so they could buy internet services for more than 1 year with the budget cycle. Then they extended that to all the county offices, called the K-12 high-speed network. So we have very good internet access to all of the county offices of ed. It's getting it to the schools, which was the last mile, and now it's getting to the last inches. So, and I think, Alex, what you say is true. We've had eNet, which is supposedly a way of trying to redistribute funds to get access to needed places, funds for rural electrification, rural networking, but it hasn't worked. Write the FCC and look at the FCC broadband report and see. It's the international. We're getting behind in the world. We're a fourth world country when it comes to networking.
If we did what I'm talking about, a 1 gig to every person in the country, we'd have growth for a decade. Because we'd be able to do so many things, that we're limited. There's so many choices we make based on lack of access, a lack of fast access and seamless access. Jason, and then Bruce.
John took the words right out of my mouth. There is historical precedent for this, and it is in the form of the rural electrification bill that really did move this country forward in a way that had never happened before, at least not for a country of this size. Yeah, it's easy in Europe, but we're a big place. So yes, absolutely, it should be a Title II a common carrier, and it bothers me that it's still discussed. But yeah.
Bruce and then Chris.
Just one small bit of good news. I read this morning that one of the major telecommunication companies has now offered $10 billion over the next year to pay for internet access for children who are on the school lunch programs. So it's
which organization is that?
Who?
It's the third, and for some strange reason I can't think of the name.
Sprint, T-Mobile.
T-Mobile. There we go.
T-Mobile.
They had an announcement this morning that talked about this $10 billion donation that they're going to make, or putting that money into it.
That's great, and they're usually the most aggressive of the bunch. Chris?
Charter schools are partially premised on the idea that they're freer of regulation and the constraints that public schools are subject to. I think this is an opportunity to think of our charter school students as spies behind enemy lines. And in flipping the, remember that the spies in Europe during World War II only communicated with headquarters for a microsecond or a day or so. They sent information and they received information, and they turned the radio back into a lamp. Can we enlist our charter school students in a similar arrangement where what they're receiving is the challenge to pursue on their own offline during the day, and then at their nighttime check-in, they're reporting on what they did, what they learned, and receiving a challenge for the next day?
Well, I do think that figuring out ways for them to also be able to call in or be, to listen to the conversation. And again, when we get away from, when we're sending all the materials asynchronously and they can get it, they could theoretically just call a line in and listen and participate in that conversation, which is one of the reasons that Mukana has audio. Anyway, so next question.
Yeah, Prima also wants to know, have you considered inviting leading edge private and public K-12 educators as guests, focus on education, to talk about present, future issues and trends?
I think we have some great educators here that are able to talk about those trends, that are already in the trenches, that are doing that are very, very impressive in our group. But we're also talking to some folks about bringing some special guests in on Fridays. And we're still working through the introductions and process of some thinkers to make that work. Next question.
Ken Jones wants to know, in Zoom meetings, how should one manage distractions? What's the best way to document disciplinary actions to defend against the parents of the little darlings? Evernote, OneNote, something else?
I don't have as much experience, only because I asked my kids about that yesterday, because we were talking about turning it off, and they were just like, they just hadn't had that interaction. Maybe it's just this area, but they just didn't have other, they haven't had kids acting out too much. He said the biggest problem they have is the kids just stop paying attention. He said they're not acting out. They're just, you just realize they're not actually paying attention to the class at all, which we were doing in physical classrooms too. Go ahead, Tim.
Screenshots might be a good thing to collect if you're seeing things and you need evidence for when that phone call comes later.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, in many ways, this is one of those questions where I don't think it's terribly different than what you would do in a physical classroom, which is, while you're teaching, you're managing 300 things anyway. And what you need to take notes to remember something or track it down for later, where that's best for you, will be dependent on your situation. What I would say is, to the extent that you are concerned and you do have a specific policy about disciplinary action, do share it, with students and parents before class. And where you should share that is really, wherever your school website is, or wherever your parents and students are going to be looking for that content. And then for the most part, I'd say in Zoom, like all matters of discipline, you can usually get by with less than you think you need at the beginning, and then only escalate things after demonstrated need. But, classroom disruptions occur in a physical classroom as well. And so there's a lot of analogs that you can draw on. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Emily, I'm going to throw it to Emily because she's here. We were like, what happened to Emily? I saw a comment. I thought you hadn't made it, and then I saw a comment, and I was like, hey, you're not in our. Are you guys having much? Are you dealing with much related to disciplinary issues?
We haven't got there yet on my my groups of people, and I hope my level's okay.
Yep, great.
Okay, good. With my PLN networks across the country, one of the things that's coming up is equity for our students, as far as Black kids are getting kicked out of class for minor infractions. Boys are getting kicked out for minor infractions out of a Zoom class. It's just turn off their camera. It's really not, I don't see the problem. I thought it would be easier to manage some of the classroom discipline stuff, but and our districts haven't gone back online yet. The big thing that we're pushing with the teachers is to open the faucet slowly on allowing students to chat on the LMSs. So laying groundwork so the kids know what to expect, what the expectations of the class are, to know what's acceptable, that it's still school, even though, so you're not gonna just drop F-bombs randomly, and that it's gonna be okay just because it's online. But that's kind of where we're at right now. We're preparing for it. We've had a lot of SLE, which is social emotional learning workshops for our teachers around remote learning before they go back online to address some of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our biggest thing though for you guys that was funny this week was that our internet provider goes through my organization, provides it to the whole county, and it was seeing all the online activity as DOS attacks, and so it kept shutting down our Wi-Fi. So we're scrambling with that right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Go ahead, Tim.
This is an interesting conversation that both Michael and Emily have touched on, and I have this conversation with teachers all the time of taking the mindset of how you did things analog and applying the same strategies or same tools in the digital world. And for some reason, people think that they have to have a digital tool in the digital world where, if you used a grade book before to mark down participation or mark down infractions, those things still work. The policies you had in place for bad behavior still apply. And the same is true for students. For some reason, they think that once they're online, the rules are different. So just kind of getting through that mindset that things are still school, things are, the things that from the classroom still apply in Zoom, both on the teacher side and the student side.
I think it's a sensitive subject. I mean, one of the things that comes up in my head is some version of demerits for infraction, where if, for instance, in a window, I can just click on it. I'm not kicking you out, but I'm just throwing a flag at you. And you're just seeing them stack up. And then we start having conversations later with when someone shows a pattern. And I don't even know if it means that you have to do something about it. I don't know if it means that you're going to go into the corner or not. It's mostly teachers just simply, if the windows that they were in, whether it's Zoom or whatever, allowed me to right click on something and just say flag and let it drop. Yeah. But have it go into their record that they're getting flagged for those things. And then what happens is you start to see that across classes. It's not about punishment. It's about that student's having an issue that we need to, that's going across many things. We should have a conversation about what's happening. It's just seeing the red flag and looking at it that way. Go ahead, Sky, and then Michael, and then Emily.
I'm just curious about the verbiage, and Emily and Jeff, if the verbiage of gamification should be a part of the new lexicon, and leveling up. And when you talk about demerits, you talk about demerits, but again, if we're already working in a language that they understand,
my concern with it is flag. I actually got, when my kids were smaller, I got a regulation football yellow flag. And when they, it'd be and I would literally throw it at them. I'd be like, personal foul, roughing the sister, 15 minutes, and then,
Did you get a whistle?
Well, I didn't get a whistle, but I'd throw a flag at them. But the funny thing is then they would start drawing fouls. Literally.
Yes, but that's because they understood a soccer metaphor.
I know. So they'd start
I'm
drawing fouls. But that's the problem you get into with it. That's the thing that I get concerned about. Go ahead, Michael, and then Emily.
Yeah, to Alex's point, this idea of tracking useful information in the stream of a class is insanely difficult. At Berkeley, we are fortunate to have a bunch of computer science TAs that know how to build programs. and this is in part why I'm here today in some ways, is we would use tools like Slack to help us more easily as a core staff, track the information. Slack and automation happen to be a tool for that. I'd say, again, what works in your classroom. The point about building up language, though, is I think, really true in general, which is when you're in a classroom, and you don't want to just make it seem automatically like a punishment, but if you're in a situation where the expectation is videos on for the most part, and you turn off a student's video because you need to, that is a thing that can be learned by the student, which is, okay, like, you're not going to be kicked out of class, but you did something that, we should have a conversation about later. And that's a fairly low touch, just, mute the student, mute this video interaction. Still don't really know with Zoom exactly how you automatically log that stuff. You probably have to figure that on your own. But I do think that there's a lot of ways that you could have those low touch things. You can also, if you have help or if you can take a second, you can private chat students as well, and you would have those logs. So,
but again, I think that if Zoom put a tool in there,
oh yeah,
that let you just sit there, tap on a window and say, mark it, and it would keep it in the record, because there's a lot of records that we get from Zoom. If it just kept in the CSV that we're getting from Zoom, that person was marked, that stuff, that information can be merged back in and then collated and processed to figure out what's going on. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah.
So 2 things. One is as long as we're not grading kids on things that don't have to do with learning. Because I put it up in Discord, but there was someone who did a 5-point participation grade, and they were marking people down for not combing their hair. And it's it's an expectation to look professional. And yes, you need to do it in the real world, but I shouldn't have a 99 in the class because I refused to comb my hair instead of 100, or a 60 instead of a 61. That's just dumb.
Depending on the class.
Personally,
Depending on the class.
Yes, depending on the class, depending on the age too, I think is really important. We had parents literally wake their kids up and shove the Chromebook with the Zoom meeting on in front of the kid in bed because they didn't want their kid to miss class, but the parents didn't take the responsibility to wake up the kid or make the kid get up earlier. So as a teacher, what am I going to do? I'm going to mark the kid down because someone at home? No, I'm going to make a phone call and talk to the family, because I work with K through 12. So I'm going to work with the families and figure out what the issue is. It shouldn't be punitive. Second thing is John put me onto Grain, which was it lets you take clips of Zoom meetings and things like that, but embedded, they have a little icon that you literally can click. So it stars the talk. So if you had Grain running while you were doing your Zoom meeting, you can hit the little star or the red flag or whatever, and it'll mark the minutes. So if you're, that would be more for a chat situation, or if the kid was talking out loud, you can go back and review the video where you threw a flag. So there is actually a flag one, and it's a yellow flag. So you can throw a yellow flag on the stream every time something happens, and go back afterwards, look at all those yellow flags and see what kind of changes you have to make to your classroom or discussions you have to have with the student.
Yeah, absolutely. Sky. And then Colin.
Well, Michael, to a social interaction concept, Alex still has to say the word hands to get me to shut up.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm learning, and we're 165 days into this thing. So
right, yeah, it's a process.
It's a process. Thank you.
We're gonna have to move faster. Go ahead, Colin, real quick.
Quickly,
and then we'll move on.
to Michael's question, the mechanism for turning off someone's video is probably a student's video would probably be to put them in a waiting room, whereby you have the waiting room turned off when you start the class, and then when you expect everyone to have been there and you take attendance, you turn the waiting room on, and anyone who misbehaves gets put into the waiting room for whatever 5 minutes, and we'll come back to you and make sure you're behaving reasonably at that point.
The hard
Now,
part
I'm not an educator, so there may be some issues with the mechanics of putting a student in the corner for a period, but
I'm going to move on.
The mechanism within Zoom that would allow you to do something like that.
I'm gonna move on really quickly. The only thing I'll say is that as a student in high school or in grade school, I can absolutely say I would act out at the beginning of every classroom so that I was muted. That would be my methodology. So we just have to think about there's always an equal and opposite reaction.
Right, but if you're not prepared when they come back to you, then you get an absence, right? You're not,
right. No, I'd still be there. I would just I just get to go do my own thing. Listen. All right.
Well, that's
next question. I know. I'm just saying that I'm probably not the only one. All right, next question.
It's the virtual dunce cap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce Francis, what is likely to happen to teacher education in the aftermath of the pandemic?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, teacher education changes extremely slowly, glacially. However, I've long held that a wonderful potential feature of teacher education, even as it was a year ago, would be to equip our student teachers, the ones who go out and do field-based learning, with some special skills that they could bring as a value added to the classrooms and schools where they are temporarily assigned, so that they're not coming only as mendicants and learners begging to be enlightened. Sometimes that doesn't go so well, but rather as people bringing something of value to those K-12 schools where they go to be apprentices, so to speak. So in the case of the current situation, I would, if I were an active teacher educator today, I'd be equipping our students to go forth and be more tech savvy and more Zoom savvy than they would have been a year ago.
Yep. Tim, and then John.
We have a saying that that we all default to teach the way that we were taught. And so this is an amazing time in teacher education, because all of our future teachers right now are being taught on Zoom and are being taught with flipped classrooms and are being pushed into the LMS and new strategies that they were never pushed into before. So I think we're going to see a wave of very, very competent teachers 5-6 years down the road, because their default is going to be new as compared to the default that we've had for decades before. So that's going to be really interesting to watch.
Absolutely. John, and then
Yeah.
and then Greg, and then Ross, or John, and then Roscoe, then Greg, then Bruce. But
We have a
quickly,
little
because we got a bunch of questions still.
Okay, I'll be a history guy. Try to be quick. We have a little historical precedent of this. When California had money, they reduced class size in K-3, so we had a shortage of 20,000 classroom teachers. The California State University system set up a program called Cal State Teach, which was a way of letting teachers be in the classroom, but they got all their training through distributed online in the web. The real challenge is the credentialing. So the teacher ed schools prepare the teachers based on the credentialing process. And there's always been some interest in having technology skills as part of the teacher credentialing. But I think it's going to be a while before we've really modified our teacher ed programs and our credentialing to get adjusted to the new reality. Even when a teacher graduates with their credential, and Emily, you could talk to this, your learning starts. The credential means that you're safe to be put in front of a classroom. Most of our credentialed teachers become educators, and that's the difference we try to say in our Cal State Teach. You have a credential, you have a license to be a teacher. You will become an educator as you experience in the classroom and develop your skills. And at this point, it's an interesting model because everybody is learning new at this point. We'll see how quickly the licensure systems can catch up with the necessary skill sets our teachers should have. Off the soapbox.
Yep. Roscoe, and then Greg, and then Bruce.
Yeah, my daughter's in her 4th week of teaching 7th grade math for the first time ever. She just graduated college literally in August because it was delayed. And her experience was she was trained using a document camera that all through her education. And then when she got to her classroom, there wasn't one there. And, so that's just a way of saying that the techniques aren't going to change quickly. It's going to be really slow. She did get a document camera. Dad actually sent her with a C920. She could have used that if she had to, but the school, popped up and gave her one. So we're still struggling with just the technology in the classroom, and it's not suddenly going to be there.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I will yield my time.
Okay, Bruce.
I want to push a little harder on this question, particularly in light of what Tim was saying, that the students now are going through an experience where they're learning in a very different way, and they're going to be the teachers of the future. I'm concerned, and it does concern me to hear that the schools of education, and I was a director of teacher education many years ago, and the situation was still then they seem far too conservative. And should not our schools of education be supporting this revolution in better ways, rather than focusing on holding everything back, certification, control, and all of the things that fight against a revolution?
Well, I say one incendiary thing per hour. You know, like I try to keep myself to it. So here it is. This is the biggest market opportunity for companies that want to do education in the history of the world. And so public education will figure this out and they'll start moving faster, or they will build a much more efficient system. Because right now, what held education together was the fact that, well, it works mostly. You know, right now it's not working at all. So there's no delta between, well, we can stay with a safe thing or take an experimental thing. Everybody can experiment right now because everybody's failing. You know, and so the thing is that so school systems and public organizations have to think about how to your point, have to think about how to be aggressive, have to think about how to get ahead of it. Otherwise, this will be privatized. You know, like it will, you know, and it'll happen really fast. Like we're one Elon Musk dropping $2 billion into a problem and it's gone. Like, you know, and it'll, you know, because the market right now is if you take online, you can build it into a scalable system and it will work as well as it's working right now. You know, so which isn't very much, you know, and so it is very important that educational organizations think about how they're going to move forward there. Tim, real quick, and then we're going to start doing lightning round.
Yeah, there's a balance here because in business, you can try new things and you can innovate and you can fail and then you can move on. Education is too important to fail. And
that's
so
what held it.
There's that aversion to trying two things that are too drastic because the risk of failure is too high.
And when it was
the cost of failure, sorry.
When it was marginally okay, that's what held it in place. But right now it's failing everywhere. And so the thing is that thing that we said was so important, we can't experiment because of that. It's not working anywhere. And so that's why I'm going to argue that there's this huge window that you can experiment, that business can experiment into, because education isn't, because they spent the whole summer trying to figure out how they're going to come back to classes instead of just working on an online solution, you know, which we were talking about here in April, you know, of how crazy that was, you know. And so the thing is that most of us knew that they were all hosed. Anyway, we'll talk about that again over and over and over again. Anyway, next question. We're going to go into lightning round. So everyone, if I come to you, it's 10 or 15 seconds. Go ahead. Go ahead, Phil. Are you still here, Phil? No. Okay, Phil's not here. Greg, this is from Guy Cochran. Greg, how do you explain microphone polar patterns in your class?
You know, a number of years ago, I found these fantastic videos online, and I grabbed them, and each one explains a different mic pattern. And they're really, really well done. And I've been using them for 3 or 4 years and kind of feeling guilty about using somebody else's material when I should be, trying to figure this out myself.
I don't think so.
Well, that's old school. It's old school thinking. I get it.
It's also like that's what textbooks were for, and that's what like reading materials were. Like we didn't all have to write The Great Gatsby. We just had to read it.
Anyway. So it turns out I'm reviewing all this stuff and I'm putting all this stuff together for my new classes, and I go to the YouTube page and I just noticed underneath one of the clips, DVE store. I freaked. This is just a testament to the amount of knowledge and skill and just general grooviness of everybody in this club here.
That is great karma.
Well, that's the ultimate.
Guy shot him. Guy shot them all.
Yeah, I came up with the idea because I kept hearing the same thing in these forums. And so to me, this is part of what we're talking about is I took the time to really craft these. I mean, I got out a huge jib that I had to have flown in, and I put white noise on this jib and it circled around the mics, and it was a production.
It was beautiful.
In the rep from, and so what I'm saying is that what we're talking about here is there's always somebody that can do a little bit better production. It's like I want to see these things reused, and so creating content, that is getting used. I could see it getting privatized like that because we can have the money to make productions.
Yeah, absolutely. As you scale the classroom, you end up with a lot of production capabilities. Michael, can you recommend learning apps and tools for teaching coding K through 12?
Yeah, so it depends on what you're trying to do. So I think you really need to figure out what you want students to learn and whether that's a little bit more conceptual, a little bit more practical or theoretical. Um, so Scratch is the most well-known intro application, and it works very well. The one that I work on is this extension, or it's a rewrite called Snap, which is snap.berkeley.edu. And I am recommending my own thing because it is one of the only tools so far that we found that lets you go from drag and drop Lego style coding to exploring deep computer science concepts. But beyond that, what I would say is tools like Python, processing, any of the more what classically got called scripting languages have decent web interfaces. Some of these are startups that you have to be, you have to question what their privacy policies and funding models are. But there are so many tools, and it really just depends on what you want the students to do, whether that's more graphically oriented, more data oriented, building GUI apps, and pick a tool that gives you the curriculum that you want. But you have tons of options.
Yep, I'm going to keep moving. Next question here is, how could a teacher district poll the collection of student connections to determine the lowest usable connection speed? It can be hard. I mean, the one thing that I think that students they should do is send all the students to speedtest.net and just know what it is. Like, just have them all ping speedtest.net so you know what the students are dealing with. I think that would help a lot just for general, just to understand. I think that no one's thinking about it right now. They're just like, well, they can connect or they can't connect. But I think knowing what that the mean average is, what the low ends are, all those things would make a difference. Go ahead, Jeff, real quick, and we're gonna move on.
And beyond this question is, how many other students and parents are in that home trying to access at the same time? And do they all have their own computer to do that on, or are they sharing machines?
I had to get a second connection to the house because there's no way we could all four of us could do what we do on Comcast. Emily?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we sent home surveys with QR codes to link to a survey like SurveyMonkey, or each district did their own one, Google form, things like that. And we asked all those questions. The problem was the response never ever gets above like 60-something%. And trying to force people to fill it out is hard.
Yep. Michael, real quick.
Yeah, you also have to ask whether or not students are on a plan that is data capped. And so if it's a speed test, making sure that they don't run that on a capped mobile plan, because that will kill it pretty quickly. But just for class participation too, do they have that data available?
Yep. Tim McCain asks, how has anyone had students use phones to call into class sessions if they're having bandwidth limitations? Is that happening? Yeah, Roscoe and Emily's nodding her head.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, we've had to do it. I mean, unfortunately, our Zoom session is actually playing back what the students have just recorded or a scene they've just done. We're doing exercise work right now, but yeah, they've had to call in on phones, and it works, but they can't see what they were doing. They can just listen.
Tim McCain asks also, what value does the panel see for the new Zoom setting for reordering the gallery view? Specific examples. Go ahead, John, real quick.
There's a thing called a fishbowl. In a physical classroom, you would have students in the center doing something and students watching it and talking about it. So you could do the fishbowl activity. I'll go to Emily. We could ping pong back and forth. What are you going to say?
One thing to note right now is that you can't do it unless everybody's in 5.2.2. So we
things
know
coming. Things coming.
Yeah. So right now that we're stuck with it, but also being able to have the teacher in the same place, be able to group kids together, based on what for a variety of reasons. For some communities, it's the leader has to be in the center. The folks that are, let's say, monks need to be on either side of them at a certain, and it actually means something to them. So there's a bunch those, not in education necessarily, but in discussions. Go ahead, Emily, real quick.
Just in classrooms, especially starting the year remote, if you don't know those kids, being able to pin them in the same spot every day to get to know them was really, really helpful. And my teachers are super excited about.
Yeah. And I apologize that I have a 9 o'clock meeting, so I've got 1 minute to jump into my next meeting. So I'm not going to be able to go. We have 2 left, and I'm going to save those, and we'll make sure that we answer them tomorrow. So we're trying to take that on if we miss some. But come back if we didn't answer your question well enough. Come back and ask again. Thank you, everybody. Another great education discussion. I really appreciate everybody coming in the morning and being part of it. It's amazing. So I look forward to another one of these tomorrow morning. Remember, we're going to start the education coffee discussion at 7, which I think is appropriate for us. So we'll have the discussion at 7, and then 8, we'll do a general discussion. Then 9, go ahead and hit it, Mickey. I forgot to cue you. Then at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, we'll have Final Cut and Motion Q&A, which we're kind of experimenting with on this flipped classroom. So thank you all. See you tomorrow, and have a great Friday or Saturday if you're already there. All right. Thanks, guys.